Welcome to the Fight Lawyer Podcast, where we discuss combat sports and the law. Our guest today is UFC founder and Hall of Famer, Davie. Art, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So it seems that your journey began in my hometown of Brooklyn, New York. What was life like in Brooklyn? How long did you live here?
Oh, God, I was there until I left for the Marines, actually, in 66. So you're talking about 19, 20 years. I returned after the service and worked for several years as a youth counselor with Youth Services Agency in New York City.
And in place in high school, I believe you attended New York Military College here in New York. Right now, I know our current president went there. Is it true that you guys were roommates?
New York Military Academy, 1962-63. We were roommates for 4 months, from September 1963 through January 1963. Two-man room. He was 16, I was 15.
Wow. So what's it like now? Is it surreal?
Well, you know, we've seen Donald Trump in the public eye for, now it's been, more than 30 years. He's been a well-known real estate developer. He's been a casino owner. He's been a reality show star for Mark Burnett. And here, a year and a half ago, he was elected president. But he was a big man on campus at New York Military Academy. He had not gotten the rank that year that he thought that he should have gotten. A rank was appointed by the military school authorities based on personality, academic and sports athletic accomplishments. And he became a captain the following year. But he was an excellent baseball player, probably the best player on the team. And I believe the following year he became a captain. He had been there for several years, and I was there for 2 years, my sophomore and my junior year. But he started, I believe, in the 8th grade, went all the way through and became a senior and graduated in 64.
Wow. And after that, you attended college here in New York City for going to the military, right?
Yes, I was at St. John's University and Pace College. And then in 1966, I dropped out of college and enlisted in the Marines for 4 years.
What were your pursuits academically, professionally? What were you going at? What was your major?
Well, I was a political science major. I had been fairly active in some conservative, somewhat to the right of center organizations, both in college, and I was very interested in what was going on in the world at the time. The 60s were a cataclysmic time for everyone. Integration, civil rights, and the Vietnam War had turned the country upside down. So it wasn't an inappropriate political major for me.
So you had interest in politics?
Actually, yeah. And I'll tell you, though, the 3 years, 5 months, and 25 days that I served in the armed forces, with 11 months and 9 days in Vietnam, kind of turned me off to politics. I came back a little shell-shocked and with the idea that I'd like to do something for my fellow man. So I went to work for the next several years for Youth Services Agency, working with gang kids.
And in terms of combat sports, you also competed some boxing as a kid, right?
Yes, I wanted to defend myself, so I trained at a boxing gym, was training for the Golden Gloves, and in June 22nd, I believe it was, 1965, I made the mistake of getting into an argument with a wrestler, a high school wrestling champ, and that didn't turn out well. I thought the argument went well until we started to talk about sparring. It quickly degenerated into a fight, and before I knew it, my opponent had shot a double leg takedown. I was on my back. I didn't know what I was doing, and I had to submit. So that made a big impression on me, and by the time later, when I was in the Marines, every grunt had an opinion about boxing versus wrestling versus martial arts. You know, could Bruce Lee have beaten Muhammad Ali? So that was my baptism, and that's what got me interested in this idea of mixed-style fights.
Wow. And so 1993 comes around, and I'm skipping a whole lot, I understand that, but you met Jorge and Gracie, is that right?
Well, actually, I had the brainstorm in very late '89, early '90, and I was working in the advertising agency business at that point, and for another agency, and they wanted me to come up with some new ideas. One of the ideas I came up with was the world's best fighter. I had the idea at that point for a one-night, 8-man elimination tournament with all the different styles being allowed to compete on equal ground. Part of my research for that, Dmitry, was that I had discovered an article about Rorion Gracie. It was titled BAD, Bad. Pat Jordan, a sports writer from Florida, had written it, and it was in the September 1989 issue of Playboy magazine. I wound up working for an agency within 3 or 4 blocks from the back of the Gracie Academy. Talk about fate giving me a helping hand. So that's how I met Rorion Gracie. It took me literally, though, a year and a half to get him excited about doing my tournament idea, because everybody had approached him about his impromptu Gracie jiu-jitsu matches against opponents from other styles. See, everybody in the world that approached him, and he was very resistant to anybody talking to him about trying to make the Gracie challenge. He had never done business with someone who wasn't Brazilian. So it took me a year and a half. I wound up doing his advertising. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll do an ad campaign for you, direct mail. I found out he had a mailing list of 25,000. I said, if I could turn that into cash, then I want you to listen to me. He said, sure. I said, you just pay for the postage and the printing. I'll do the campaign for free. I said, that's a campaign that we sell at the agency I'm working for about $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. So over the Christmas holidays in '91, I did it. And he did the printing and the postage. It brought in $150,000 in 6 weeks. Now I walked in his office and said, you know what I want you to do now? I want you to think about which one of your brothers you're going to put in this tournament. Because if they win it, it's going to send Gracie Jiu-Jitsu through the roof. And that was the genesis right there.
Now, at some point, did you ever think, hey, this endeavor that we're undertaking, meaning putting one guy in a cage with another guy in effectively a no-holds-barred type of tournament, this is a little weird, right? Did you anticipate any of the struggles that you would encounter going forward?
Oh, absolutely. I knew from my research, my homework, that mixed-style fights had a very spotty history, that it was going to attract political opposition. There was the issue of sanctioning and whether or not it was going to be legal. My research indicated that there was one state who had a loophole in the law which made bare-knuckle fights legal, and that was Colorado. So I knew that this was not going to be an easy sale. But here's how I sold it. I told everybody this was bigger than a movie, and that all they had to do was figure out what their role was going to be. I was the Pied Piper leading them down this crusade. They had to decide, in Rorion's case, do you want to become the King Midas of the martial arts, the greatest and most influential political leader in the martial arts? I said to Bob Morris at Semaphore Entertainment, our TV partner, I said, do you want to be the Don King of this sport? You're looking for a franchise as opposed to the comedy and concerts you're doing on pay-per-view? And I said to the fighters, you've been telling your friends, your students, your family, associates, people in the martial arts magazines that you're the biggest stud on the planet, you're the best martial arts fighter. I'm going to give you a chance to prove it. Are you up for it? Will you be willing to do it? Will you come to the party? So I was like the Pied Piper at that point, Dmitry, and I was so convincing because I had a crystal ball. I could see where this was going. And it was no mystery why I knew where it was going. My research told me that for over 1,000 years, this event had been the most dominant sporting contest in the ancient Greek Olympics. It was called pankration. And from 648 BC to 395 or 394 AD, it was in the Olympics, and it was the most popular item on the card. So I was bringing back the glory of the ancient classical world. I was bringing back the glory of combat sports from ancient Greece and Rome.
And I know it seems silly kind of looking back at it now. You must have been aware, it must have been on your mind that, hey, if this happens, we may get sued by a fighter because something's not covered and, he's going to get treated and then billed for it thereafter. Things that I'm simplifying, but things of that nature. Well,
keep in mind, as I said, that I had written a business plan I had done my research. I had done my homework. And one of the things I came up with early on was that we were going to establish an LLC. The gas and oil drilling companies had LLCs, limited liability companies. It would have limited the liability of an investor to the amount of his investment. In part of my research, I looked at the EMTs and the medical support we would need, the fight doctors I would reach out to. I got Leon Tabbs, the great cut man from Joe Frazier's gym in Philadelphia, along with the great Sam Solomon, who was in Sonny Liston's corner when he fought Cassius Clay in Miami in 1964. So all of what I needed to do, I did. I needed medical support. I needed to look at insurance. I got Joe Gagliardi at the famous boxing insurance agency in San Jose, California, who had done all the boxing shows. Again, when you do your homework, you get answers to all of these problems. That was all the opening I needed to persuade 27 investors to invest in WOW Promotions, War of the World Promotions. And with that money, I went and rented McNichols Sports Arena in Denver, the home of the Nuggets, no little high school gym for this show. I wanted an NBA stadium with 16,000 seats. And then I went out and got a TV partner. I got turned down by HBO, by Showtime. I got turned down by ESPN. But I found Semaphore Entertainment Group. They were funded by BMG in Europe, Bertelsmann's music group. At that time, Dmitry, that was the largest privately held entertainment corporation on the planet Earth. When I found out that Semaphore had BMG as their funding source, I saw dollar signs. I knew I was looking for the deep pockets. I found them. So everything I needed everything that I had prepared was in the business plan that I wrote for 65 pages. It was all there. And that's how I got the investors. That's how I got the partners. That's how I got the fighters. It was, one thing I was capable of doing. I was an entrepreneur. I'd owned a car dealership, an ad agency, a video dating service, a software development company. The WOW Promotions was just the next new pioneering entrepreneurial effort on Art Davie's game plan.
How did you do in terms of organization? Who was responsible for the matchups, the fighters? What was Horian's role?
Early on, I got a great agreement from Horian. I said, Horian, you're going to put one of your brothers in this event. I said, whether you're going to be the manager directly or it'll be a surrogate. I said, we can't have you being the booker matchmaker. And he agreed. And that was a wonderful concession on his part because I didn't have a black belt in anything. I had done a little boxing in Catholic Youth Organization at St. Thomas Aquinas in Flatbush and Flatlands in Brooklyn. And I did a little boxing in the Marines. But what I was an ad guy, a salesman. I owned a car dealership. I'm a hustler. I'm a peddler. I'm a P.T. Barnum. And Horian graciously and wisely stepped aside. And so early on, he was going to continue to run the Gracie Academy. That was a full-time job. In fact, when I first met him, he had just moved from the old garage in Redondo Beach, and they moved into a wonderful new multi-square-foot facility in Torrance, California. As I said, close to my office. That's how I was able to walk over there with, right from my office. So Horian was going to be busy. I went out and hired Kathy Kidd that I met at an international MMA trade show in Pasadena. I brought in Sherry Santos, whose husband, Fabio Santos, was an instructor at the Gracie Academy. She became my secretary receptionist. And I went to work full-time on this. We brought in investment money with those 27 investors. We were rocking and rolling. It was a rocket ship ride that never stopped accelerating. It got bigger and better every step of the way.
And Horian, the Gracie family generally has this reputation of liking control. That must not have been easy for him to relinquish on some level, putting in his brother in there with, the plethora of guys that were there that first event. I mean, Ken Shamrock just looks like a guy that you don't want to fight. And so, I'm sure they had confidence in their system, but it must have taken some larger perspective to see, hey, we got to relinquish some control, take that risk, and kind of see where it lands us.
Well, they had no apprehension or reservation about fights. I had witnessed a half a dozen impromptu matches in the Gracie Academy. In fact, that's how I met John Milius. I'm standing next to him one day on a Saturday matchup down in the big back room of the Gracie Academy. And the Gracies always had confidence in letting some black belt come in with his posse, and they would greet him, treat him with great respect. They'd go in the back room, and a couple of, his posse would be there and some of the Gracie students. and they'd throw down. And Horian always had a mantra that if the guy is a gentleman and doesn't, try to elbow you, and it was, more of a little bit of a stand-up match, you don't punish him. If the guy wants to go a second and a third time, and now he's sticking his finger in your eye or he's trying to fish hook you, then you really kick his ass. So most of the guys walked out of there having shaking Horian's hand, being patted on the back, complimented for their class and character, for testing their art. And Horian, I never saw any apprehension about, the concern about fighters. Now, as I started to bring in the wrestlers, after I brought in Severin, there was a concern because the Gracies were smart enough to know that their real opponents weren't the strikers, weren't the kickers, the punchers, the boxers, the karate champs, the taekwondo black belts. That wasn't their real opposition. Their real concern was the grapplers. I remember seeing a 30-minute video in Horian's academy that he had of Hickson, his brother, spending about 20 minutes on the mat up in Salt Lake City with Mark Schultz, the Olympic gold medalist. Now, he eventually got Schultz's arm, but it took him about 20 minutes to get it. So when I started bringing the wrestlers, that's when Horian started to get a little nervous. Actually, the bigger issue was Horian having to accede to my business acumen. I said to Horian early on, I said, you're a black belt on the mat. I'm a black belt when it comes to making a deal. So I had a lot of support from Horian in that area because I was the one who got Semaphore Entertainment. I was the one who got the fighters. I was the one who got our partners, our strategic allies. And Horian and I had a good working relationship. And we were united about one thing, Dmitry, and one thing very strongly. We both got a big kick out of proving that some of these guys in the martial arts magazines telling people that they had the death touch and what they were doing was invincible. And we both took a great pleasure, a devilish pleasure, in my bringing those guys in, and so many of them finding out that what they were doing wasn't worth a bucket of warm soup.
That's funny. Why do you think Zuffa had so much success the ones they took it over? Was it really because they could get it licensed and legitimized using the commissions and all those things?
Well, you got to remember that Zuffa opposed it early on. They voted twice against allowing the UFC to come in. When I say Zuffa, I'm talking about Lorenzo Fertitta, who was on the athletic commission in Nevada. They voted against it twice. But what Zuffa brought to the party once Dana introduced Lorenzo to rolling with John Lewis on the mat was that they brought great business skills. They were all MBA. The gaming business in Nevada is the biggest business in the state. And the guys who run casinos are very bright guys. We're talking about some of the best entrepreneurs, west of the Mississippi or east of the Mississippi. And then they brought serious money to party. You got to remember that Lorenzo did an interview in Indianapolis at one point in which he admitted that the net operating loss was around $50 million, about $40 million when they decided to buy the time and pay for the production to go on that first season of Spike. Talk about guts, balls. I give a lot of credit to the Fertitta brothers. With smarts, money, and balls, they turned it around. And believe me, it took them 5 years. They didn't show a profit, in my humble opinion, probably till 2006. I think they bled cash for the first 5 years. They made a couple of mistakes in the beginning, not a lot. But those guys are very smart, and the biggest thing they had going for them is they are tough. They hung in there. I can tell you at one point, a group approached me to represent them, and I came in and sat down with Lorenzo around 2002 or 3. And if this group had the money, Lorenzo would have sold. And when I found out these guys couldn't come up with $25 million, Lorenzo said, all right, thanks for checking them out. He said, if you ever come up with anything else, let me know. They were looking to sell, those years, probably 2003, 4. It really got turned around in 2005 when they got the Ultimate Fighter, which is what Vince McMahon had in wrestling. You have the weekly cable show. You build up your stars, your heroes and your villains, your baby faces and your heels, and then you bring them to pay-per-view once a month. That's the formula. So I give the Fertittas a lot of credit. But in the beginning, man, they lost some money, and you have to say that by hanging in there, I gave them a compliment in the Hall of Fame speech. I said, if they hadn't done that, I wouldn't be standing here tonight. That's the truth.
And I also know you did some work with K1 back in the day. Why was K1 never really able to take off as a mainstream brand here in the States? You'd think the same demographic that is attracted to MMA and boxing would embrace it, no?
A couple of reasons. Number one, Sony owned most of their content, and NHK Television and Fuji Television. Ishii had sold the control of that. So when I needed footage, of being able to build up an Ernesto Hoost or an Andy Hoog in America, I had to deal with ESPN. They would have run it starting at midnight, running all throughout the night for 6 months. And it would have allowed me to create some awareness for what was this new fighting sport. We didn't have that. The first pay-per-view that they insisted that I do in the States, they wanted to do on the same night that the WWE was going to be at Sturgis, their annual Sturgis with all the bikers, which was a big pay-per-view for them. So on August 6th, in 1998, we're on the same night. So our pay-per-view numbers were a disappointment. Ishii, with his backers in Osaka, was disappointed. I stayed on board with the company for the next 2 years, but they never got over the fact that they weren't going to become big with the first punch they threw in the United States. The United States is the land of entertainment, right? And Japan had built a tremendous franchise in Japan. It was huge. And their shows in Japan were stunning. The production quality was unbelievable. They would bring in the whole Berlin Symphony to play Wagner. They would lower the fighters from the ceiling as if they were in flying saucers, the 8 fighters in the final term. Unbelievable. But, I brought them to the Bellagio. Steve Wynn sat ringside, and we had a sellout at the Bellagio, but the pay-per-view numbers were not strong. They were under 30,000. They never recovered.
And it's interesting because clearly you're a terrific promoter. Why did you never dive deep into boxing promotion or fighter management or anything in the boxing realm?
I had no interest in boxing promotion. There was Butch Lewis and Bob Arum and Don King, and I would have been up against guys who have been doing it for 30 years. I didn't see that as a viable entrepreneurial opening. Never was interested in fight management. Bob Marowitz once said something very interesting to me, my TV partner at Semaphore. He said, the thing with fight management is the fighter calls you at 4 a.m. in the morning. He's been arrested. He's at the Malibu police station, and he wants you to pick up his dog on the way in. That's the job of a fight manager. It's a babysitter. And unless you're willing to, it's true with actors too, by the way. So unless you're willing to do that, you ought to go to another business, like maybe selling earth shoes. That makes sense?
It does. It definitely. I've heard that from other people as well.
Yeah.
But also boxing's dying down, right? They're saying MMA's taking its place. Why do you think that is? Is it because of the promotional structure, the different governing bodies?
UFC 1 shows that showed that boxing was one-dimensional. And that was always the mantra that the Gracies were chanting. In a real fight, as opposed to maybe not a real street fight where you can pick up a gun, a knife, or a brick, but in a real fight between two guys, and one is just a boxer, the guy who knows grappling is going to dominate. I mean, my research when I wrote the business plan about mixed style fights was that John L. Sullivan, the great bare knuckle boxing champion, went into the ring with Ernst Robler, the famous wrestler, and he got taken down, was forced to tap out. He said, something? 8 out of 10 times in a match between a boxer and a wrestler, the wrestler will win. And James J. Corbett, Gentleman Jim, went into the ring with Robler as well, and he had the same statement. So when you look at the history of mixed style fights, the grappling was going to become very evident as powerful and hypnotic and telegenic, and it did. So, the first event, Semaphore thought we might do 30,000 pay-per-views, with the pay-per-view broadcast. We did 86,592. Then following week, I got a call from the famous wrestling promoter. I'm trying to think of his name now. I can't think of his name. It wasn't Vince McMahon. It's the other guy. And he calls me up and says, "Where the hell did you guys come from?" He said, you guys are like, you're like the ghosts. You land and you do these numbers and we're all like stunned. People were stunned with what we were doing. We came out of nowhere. But I knew with the history of pancreation for over 1,000 years, this was bound to be a hit. And we were. People were waiting for UFC 2. When are you coming back? Who are you going to put in it? The UFC 2, I made it a 16-man tournament, which was the ultimate, and which was really crazy. Poor Hoist had to beat 4 guys that night to win $60,000. in one night. And you don't find out who you're going to fight until the previous night, in your first bout, in the fighters meeting. I mean, it was another era. Those guys were pioneers. They were the test pilots of MMA.
And over the years, you've never, at least to my knowledge, sought to work in any other MMA organizations in any executive capacity. There have been a ton of them. Strikeforce, Bellator's around now, so on and so forth. Why is that?
Well, when you give birth to the baby that dominated the whole industry, can you ever be happy with anything else? That was my baby. And my baby grew up and conquered the world. What am I going to do? I'm going to work with someone else's kid, that isn't as good, that isn't as big, that isn't as strong. I wasn't interested. And something, after I had done it and I knew what I did, I was pretty satisfied. I'd made a nice chunk of dough, and I had made money at other things. So money wasn't I really never did it for the money. I did it because I thought I wanted to do it. I thought it would be a tremendous accomplishment to climb that mountain. And how could I top that? I rode this train all the way to the Hall of Fame, and that's kind of cool. I was really pleased the other day that Ant Evans over at the UFC had given me so much support, and he came up with one of the lines that I included in my speech. The line allowed me to basically present myself to the whole MMA universe as the father of the UFC, which in a way is bigger than being the creator and co-founder, which is in the UFC press release. He basically was allowing me to say, I'm the father of the UFC. This was my child. What's big? What's more important to something? It's like being George Washington is the father of the country. I'm the father of the UFC. Wow.
I would just think that all those guys would want to work with you. The promoters, the owners, the shareholders. I mean, you're a guy that clearly has a knack for this stuff. You were able to sell it to people when nobody knew what it was. Now everybody knows what it was. I would think everybody would want to be in business with you, but hey.
Be honest with you, at this point, they certainly don't need me over there. They've got an organization with Endeavor IMG, that's a $7 billion company. So and this thing is obviously well established now. On the other hand, you've got the international market, which is some problematic in terms of what you can do in certain markets unless you're really hooked up with someone locally and understand that situation, the politics of that region, the fighters. But I predict that the MMA will be bigger in 10 years than it is today. When you think about how much passion there is behind soccer, what we call soccer in America and what the rest of the world calls football, ultimately MMA is destined to be bigger. When you think about the nationalism, the nationalistic feeling that could be generated by fighters, and as my good friend Don Fry, the Predator, says, MMA is the purest sport there is. Everybody loves a good fight. So if this becomes truly an international sport where, a fighter from Bhutan is fighting up against a guy from Joplin, Missouri, or Argentina is up against a guy from Jakarta, and you're trying to find out the best fighter in the world, and maybe he's from Russia, maybe he's from Manchester in England, maybe he's from Puerto Rico. This is going to get bigger. We've only seen, in a sense, the tip of the iceberg. Remember, this was the biggest sport in the ancient Greek Olympics. Bigger than the decathlon and the marathon and even horse racing. That's how big it was. The athletes who won pankration were considered the gods. There was a great statue in the Altus of Polydamas. I mentioned him in my book. In fact, I'm working on a novel now called Demigod about Polydamas. I'm very excited about that, and so is my agent. I'm writing a novel about Polydamas, who won it in 408 BC, lost it in 404 BC, did some fabulous stunts, including killing a lion with a club and fighting 3 of the famous bodyguards of the Persian emperor and defeating them all at once. He was supposedly a giant, about 7 feet tall, over 300 pounds, like a big Shaquille O'Neal. I'm writing a novel right now called Demigod. So, when I look at this, what it is today, Dmitry, I'm looking into the future. My crystal ball tells me it's going to be bigger. It's going to be better. It's going to be something that there'll be kids who aren't even born today will be getting into and will be passionate about. And many of them will rediscover the earliest days the same way that maybe a baseball fan rediscovers, some of the great ball players of the past, like Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays. There'll be kids in the future that'll rediscover Ken Shamrock and Mark Coleman and Randy Couture, Mark Kerr, Vitor Belfort, all of that. What a future. It's going to be great. And I'm proud that I gave birth to it. I was the doctor. In a sense, the universe was saying to me, this thing really wants to be born. All you got to do, Art, is your job. Just get the damn thing born. It'll take off. I said that in the Hall of Fame speech. I said, I thought I was the creator. He said, here's what I know now. I didn't create the UFC. The UFC created me. It created Art Davie, created Hoist Gracie, created Ronda Rousey. And then I held my arms up in front of the crowd there that night in the Pearl Theater, and I said, the UFC created all of us, all over the world. It wanted to be born, Dmitry. It wanted to grow, and it's going to get a lot bigger. Woof.
How much did that mean to you, that Hall of Fame? I mean, obviously, it's a given that you'd get in there. Oh, I don't know how much
it wasn't a given. Dmitry, it wasn't a given in the fact that they've had the thing since 2005, 13 years. It wasn't a given, bro. But I said in my speech, Dmitry, I said, it happened at the right time. And I said, I'm impressed by the symbolism of my induction coming during the UFC's 25th anniversary year. And I said, it feels great. The UFC's press release said they acknowledged me as the creator and co-founder, the first matchmaker, legend. It was wonderful. I had a great time the other night. And when I left the theater that night, there were 1,000 fans in front of that theater who kept me writing autographs and taking pictures with me for over an hour. We were going to maybe go have a little party at that point. And for that whole hour, I stood there talking to the fans, taking pictures, and listening to them, telling me what MMA meant to them. What a thrill. Wasn't any better than that, my friend.
And you wrote your first book a few years ago. Why did you decide to do that? Why was that the right time?
Well, 4 years ago, actually it was 5 years ago, I got approached by, 7 years ago, I got approached by Sean Wheelock, who was the play-by-play commentator at Bellator. And he said, Art, I think you ought to do a book. I said, yeah, but a lot of people are talking to me about a book. I've been thinking about it. I haven't done it. Todd Hester over at Gladiator and magazine, and Grappling Magazine had asked me to do a book. But Sean was real persistent. He found a publisher in Kansas City, and we started on it. And Sean got a little bit of a writer's block. He said, let me really edit the book. He had a lot of great ideas for it, and a lot of them, including the title, came from him. So somewhere between August of 2013 and about April of 2014, the book got written, and we was published on July 4th in 2014. It's done very well. It was optioned as a film in 2015, and a decent script was written, but the producer wasn't able to get the independent funding that they wanted. Then I got control of the rights again, and I sold them to a producer who's done some really great films, including his last two films have gotten Academy Award nominations for their leading men. And he's very close to an announcement of a studio deal for the book. So we're real excited about how well the book is done. I did the book with Sean's support and encouragement, and his leading the charge, saying, "All right, you got to write a book." And it was great to do it because I have a great memory. I had all the notes as an ad guy. Every meeting I ever held when I was in the ad business, I had notes. You don't, as an account executive, every time you meet with a client or the client's customer, you write down what you learned. So I had notes on the first UFC like you wouldn't believe. And all the facts, all the dates, all the meetings, all the impressions that I had of everything. And the book, like I said, from August to the following April. And it was my first attempt to write a nonfiction book. And I had a lot of fun doing it. We've gotten a great response.
Understood. Art, it's been so great of you to join us. Where can people go to find out more about you, what you're up to these days, where people can find you?
Well, I'm always on Twitter. I'm on, at Art Davie. On Skype, I'm UFC Creator 1. On Instagram, I'm UFC Creator. If anybody wants to find out more, I always tell them, go to www.isthislegalthebook.com. And you'll be able to order the book either as an ebook or a hard copy or an autographed version. And you'll find a lot of things that we couldn't even fit in the book. You'll find a lot of photos and sketches and things in there that weren't in the book. So isthislegalthebook.com. And keep your eyes and ears open for a film in this next year. I think it'll be in the theaters. I think it'll be in front of the cameras by January. So I'm very excited. I certainly appreciate being with you today, Dmitry, and your enthusiasm and passion for MMA is evident. Appreciate your good questions.
What a journey it's been. Art, once again, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Dmitry. Looking forward to talking to you again soon in the future, my friend.
And that's our interview with Art Davie. I hope you had a good time. Thanks so much for listening. My name's Dmitriy Shakhnevich. If you want to learn more about me, please visit www.dshaklaw.com. And this is the Fight Lawyer Podcast. Till next time, folks.